The girl stood in the center of the dusty street with bare feet and tangled hair the color of autumn wheat, her eyes tracking the approaching riders with an intensity that made the horses uneasy. And when she bared her teeth at the lead stallion, the animal reared back so violently its rider nearly lost his seat in the saddle. "What in the name of hell?" the rancher shouted, yanking hard on the reins as his mare danced sideways. 3 other men pulled their horses to a halt behind him, dust rising in plumes around them in the afternoon heat of June 1878. The town of Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory, wasn't much more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence at the edge of the mountains, but it rarely saw spectacles like this. The girl couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. Dressed in buckskin that looked handmade and poorly fitted, the leather worn soft from use but stitched together with an unpracticed hand. Her face was smudged with dirt, and she moved with a strange, prowling gait as she circled the horses, never taking her eyes off them. "She was raised by wolves," the rancher, a portly man named Dutch Henderson, laughed nervously, trying to mask his unease with humor. His companions chuckled, but the sound died quickly when the girl made a low sound in her throat that was distinctly inhuman. "No." The single word came from the boardwalk, spoken in a voice like gravel and honey mixed together. She was raised by survivors. Every head turned toward the speaker, and even the strange girl froze. Her attention snapping to the man who stepped down from the wooden planks with the fluid grace of a predator. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, missing nothing. He wore buckskin similar to the girl's, but expertly crafted, the fringe swaying with each measured step. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled to the elbows, were corded with muscle built from years of hard living in the mountains. A knife hung at his hip, and he carried a rifle with the ease of a man who knew how to use it and had done so many times before. "Colton Reeves," Dutch Henderson said, his voice losing some of its bluster. "Didn't know you were in town." "Passing through," Colton said, his eyes never leaving the girl. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible. When he was 10 feet away, he crouched down, bringing himself closer to her level. "You speak English?" The girl tilted her head, studying him with those unnervingly sharp eyes. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, she whispered, "Some." "You got a name?" She hesitated, as if trying to remember something from a long time ago. "Elara." "That's a pretty name," Colton said gently. "You hungry, Elara?" Her eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe, or memory of what hunger felt like. She nodded once, a quick jerk of her chin. "There's a restaurant just there," Colton said, and gesturing with his head toward the building behind them. "They serve good stew. You want some?" The girl, Elara, looked past him to the watching men on their horses, then back to Colton. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because she nodded again. Colton rose to his full height, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "Come on, then." He started toward the restaurant, not looking back to see if she followed. After a moment, he heard the soft pad of bare feet on packed earth behind him. Dutch Henderson called out, "You taking responsibility for that wild thing, Reeves?" Colton paused, glancing back over his shoulder. His expression was mild, but there was steel underneath. "She's not a thing, Henderson. She's a person. And yeah, I'm taking responsibility." Inside the restaurant, a poidur, a small establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, Colton chose a table in the back corner where Elara could sit with her back to the wall. She took the position immediately, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting attack from any direction. Mrs. Chen approached with curiosity written across her weathered face, but Colton's slight shake of his head stopped her questions. "2 bowls of whatever you got hot, ma'am, and some bread if you have it." "Coffee?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Water for her. Coffee for me." When Mrs. Chen retreated to the kitchen, Colton leaned back in his chair, giving Elara space. "You been on your own long?" Alara's fingers drummed on the table in a nervous pattern. "Always. Everybody comes from somewhere." Her jaw tightened. "Not anymore." Colton recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own reflection often enough. Loss. The kind that carved out pieces of you and left holes that never quite filled in. Fair enough, he said quietly. We all got a right to our past, whether we share it or not. She studied him with renewed interest, as if surprised he wasn't pressing for answers. You live in mountains, she said. It wasn't a question. I do. Alone? Mostly. Why? Colton considered the question. Same reason you're uncomfortable in this town right now. Too many people makes my skin itch. Mountains are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not. For the first time, something that might have been a smile flickered across Elara's face. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but Colton caught it. Mrs. Chen returned with 2 steaming bowls of venison stew and a plate of fresh bread. The moment she set the food down, Elara's entire body tensed with focus. Her hand shot out, grabbing the bread and bringing it to her mouth in one swift motion. Easy, Colton said softly. Ain't nobody gonna take it from you. Eat slow, or you'll make yourself sick. Elara paused, the bread halfway to her mouth. She watched him break off a piece of his own bread and dip it in the stew before eating it with deliberate slowness. After a moment, she mimicked his actions, though her movements remained quick and efficient. They ate in silence, and Colton noticed how she relaxed incrementally as her stomach filled. Color came back into her cheeks, and some of the wildness left her eyes, replaced by a cautious awareness. Where will you go? Colton asked when their bowls were empty. Elara's shoulders rose and fell. Somewhere. That's not much of a plan. Got me this far. Looking at you, I'd say it just barely did. Colton leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I got a cabin about 15 miles north of here, up in the high country. Got more space than I need and more quiet than most people can stand. You want to come up there for a spell? Get your strength back. You're welcome to. Suspicion flashed across her face. Why? Because I was you once, Colton said simply. Long time ago, somebody helped me when they didn't have to. Figure I ought to pass that along. Elara's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the ulterior motive. Colton let her look. He had nothing to hide. At least, not anything that mattered in this moment. Finally, she nodded. Okay? Okay, Colton echoed. He stood, dropping coins on the table that more than covered the meal. I got to get some supplies before we head out. You want to come with, or you want to wait here? Come with. Thought you might. They spent the next hour moving through Sweetwater's limited business district. At the general store, Colton bought flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples, along with a pair of boots that looked like they might fit Elara. She accepted them with a wariness that suggested she wasn't used to receiving gifts, but she put them on immediately, lacing them with quick, nimble fingers. At the livery stable, Colton retrieved his horse, a massive bay gelding named Bear who lived up to his name in both size and temperament. The animal was 17 hands if he was an inch, with a chest like a barrel and legs thick as tree trunks. When Elara approached, Bear snorted and tossed his head, but Colton noticed the horse didn't show the same fear the other animals had displayed. He likes you, Colton observed. Animals know, Elara said cryptically. Know what? Who understands? Colton swung into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to Elara. She looked at it for a moment, then grasped his forearm. He pulled her up behind him with one smooth motion, settling her onto Bear's broad back. She stiffened at first, uncomfortable with the proximity, but as they started moving, she gradually relaxed against him. They rode out of Sweetwater as the sun began its descent toward the jagged peaks to the west. Was it painting the sky in shades of orange and gold? The trail Colton followed was barely visible, more of a suggestion than an actual path, winding through pine forests and across mountain meadows dotted with wildflowers. Elara remained silent behind him, but Colton could feel her attention on everything around them, the way the wind moved through the trees, the distant call of an eagle, the tracks visible in the soft earth where elk had passed earlier in the day. She was reading the wilderness the same way he did, with an instinctive understanding that couldn't be taught. How'd you learn to survive out here? Colton asked as they climbed higher into the mountains. Family, Elara said after a long pause. Before what? Her arms tightened slightly around his waist. Before they died. Colton didn't push for more. Some stories came out in their own time, and some never came out at all. They taught you well, he said instead. Most city folk wouldn't last a week alone in wild country. We were never city folk. What were you? Trappers, traders, moved with the seasons. Her voice carried the weight of memory. Mama was Shoshone, Papa was French-Canadian. They met at a rendezvous when she was 16. He taught her French, she taught him how to live. Sounds like they loved each other. Yes? The single word held an ocean of grief. Darkness was falling by the time they reached Colton's cabin, a sturdy structure built from lodge pole pine and chinked with mud and moss. It sat in a small clearing beside a fast-moving creek, with mountains rising on three sides and a sweeping view of the valley below. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Fruin lamplight glowed in the windows. Thought you lived alone, Elara said, tension returning to her body. I do. Left the fire banked this morning. Won't hurt nothing. Colton dismounted and helped her down, then led Bear to a small stable attached to the cabin. While he unsaddled the horse and made sure the animal had feed and water, Elara stood in the clearing, slowly turning in a circle as she took in her surroundings. When Colton finished with Bear, he found her standing beside the creek, her head tilted as she listened to the water's song. It's safe here, she said quietly. As safe as anywhere can be, Colton agreed. He moved past her to the cabin door, pushing it open and gesturing for her to enter. Come on, I'll show you around. The interior of the cabin was simple but well maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a table and chairs positioned nearby. A cooking area occupied one corner, complete with a cast-iron stove and shelves holding tin plates and cups. Two doors led to separate rooms, one Colton's bedroom, the other a smaller space he used for storage. You can have the spare room, Colton said, already moving to clear out the extra traps, pelts, and equipment he'd accumulated. I'll get it sorted for you. Elara watched him work, and after a moment she began helping, carrying things out to the main room without being asked. They worked in companionable silence, and within an hour the small room held a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a wooden chest, and a single chair positioned beneath the window. It's not much, Colton said, but it's warm and dry. It's good, Elara said. She sat on the edge of the bed, testing its give. Thank you. You're welcome. Colton moved back to the main room. I'll get a fire going, make some coffee. You want anything else? No. But Colton noticed she followed him out of the room anyway, as if being alone felt wrong after the day's strange turn of events. He didn't comment on it, just went about his evening routine, building up the fire, putting coffee on to boil, checking his supplies to see what he'd need to hunt in the coming days. Elara settled into the chair nearest the fire, curling her legs beneath her and watching the flames with an expression that was almost peaceful. The dancing light played across her features, and for the first time, Colton noticed how striking she was beneath the dirt and wariness. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had once smiled more readily. How old are you? Colton asked, pouring coffee for himself. 19, I think. Lost track for a while. Been on your own that whole while? 3 years, she glanced at him. You? 32? How long in the mountains? 14 years. Came up here when I was your age, more or less. Haven't had much cause to go back down since. What did you leave behind? Colton took a long sip of his coffee, feeling the bitter heat of it burn down his throat. Nothing good. My pa was a drunk who liked using his fists. Ma died when I was 12. I ran soon as I was big enough to survive it. Elara nodded, understanding in her eyes. Bad families exist. They do. Sounds like you had a good one, though. The best. Her voice went soft. Me, Mama could track a butterfly through a thunderstorm. Papa could make anything with his hands. Traps, shelters, toys. Had a little brother, too, Samuel. He was 7. The past tense hung heavy in the air. Colton waited, giving her space to continue or not as she chose. Cholera, Elara finally said. 3 years ago, late summer. We'd camped near a trading post. Thought we were being careful, but something got into the water. Papa died first, then Samuel, then Mama. Her hands clenched in her lap. I watched them all die, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Wasn't your fault, Colton said firmly. Disease doesn't care how good you are or how careful you are. It just takes. I know. Doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the night filled with the sounds of the mountains, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine boughs, the distant yip of coyotes calling to each other across the darkness. "Why'd you help me?" Elara asked eventually. "Really?" Colton considered the question carefully. "Because you reminded me of that scared kid I used to be. Because I saw strength in you, the kind that comes from surviving when you had every reason to give up. And because," he paused, meeting her eyes, "because I saw something worth saving." Color rose in Elara's cheeks and she looked away quickly. "I'm not used to people. I noticed. I might not be good at this." "At what?" "Being around someone, talking, all of it." "You're doing fine so far," Colton said, "and there's no pressure. You want to spend your days wandering the woods and only coming back to sleep, that's your business. You want company, I'm here. Simple as that." Elara looked at him again, and something shifted in her expression. A loosening, a letting go of some small piece of the armor she'd built around herself. "Okay," she said. "Simple as that." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Colton rose with the sun, as was his habit, and often found Elara already awake, sitting on the porch and watching the dawn paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. They'd have coffee together in comfortable silence, then go about their respective tasks. Colton tended to the daily work of mountain living, hunting, fishing, checking his trap lines, maintaining his equipment. Elara explored the surrounding wilderness with the enthusiasm of someone reuniting with an old friend. She'd disappear for hours, returning with herbs for cooking or healing, her pockets full of interesting stones, once with a baby fox she'd found abandoned that they nursed back to health before releasing it. In the evenings, they'd share meals Colton cooked with increasing contributions from Elara, who turned out to know plants and roots he'd never considered edible. They'd talk, though Elara remained more comfortable with silence than speech. But gradually, word by word, story by story, she began to open up. She told him about her childhood on the move, about winters spent in sheltered valleys and springs following the trap lines north. She described the rendezvous gatherings, where trappers and traders came together to sell their wares, trade stories, and celebrate survival. She spoke of her mother's people, the Shoshone, and the summers she'd spent with them, learning their ways and their language. In turn, Colton told her about his own past, though there was less to tell. He'd grown up in St. Louis, in a cramped apartment that smelled of whiskey and desperation. He'd taken his beatings and learned to make himself small, invisible. When he'd finally run at 18, he'd headed west with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning need to put distance between himself and everything he'd known. "How'd you learn to survive?" Elara asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Trial and error, mostly. Made a lot of mistakes early on. Nearly froze to death my first winter. Ate some berries that had me sick for a week. But I met people along the way who taught me things. Old trapper named Gus showed me how to read animal signs. Crow woman named Singing Bird taught me which plants could heal and which could kill. Blacksmith in Virginia City taught me metalwork, how to repair my own tools. People were kind to you. Some were, others weren't. I learned to tell the difference pretty quick." Elara pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "What did you see in me? That first day?" Colton thought about it. "I saw someone who'd been hurt but hadn't let it break her, someone who'd adapted instead of giving up. And I saw someone who needed a hand but was too proud or too scared to ask for it." "I was scared," Elara admitted. "I'd been avoiding towns for months, but I was so hungry, and I thought maybe I could steal something. Then all those horses came, and I just reacted. Your instincts are good. They kept you alive. They made me look crazy. To fools like Henderson, maybe, but I knew what I was looking at." Elara turned her head, studying his profile in the fading light. "Why do you really live alone, Colton? It's not just because towns make you uncomfortable." He was quiet for a long time. "There was a woman," he finally said, "long time ago. I was 23, thought I'd found someone who understood me. Her name was Sarah. We were going to get married, build a life together." He paused, old pain flickering across his face. She got caught in a flash flood while I was out checking traps. By the time I found her, it was too late. I'm sorry. It was 9 years ago, but after that, I just didn't see the point in trying again. Easier to be alone. Safer. For who? The question hit harder than Colton expected. Both of us, I guess. Except there is no us if you're alone. No, Colton agreed. There's not. They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence than before, weighted with things unsaid, with possibilities neither of them was quite ready to name. As summer deepened, Colton found himself increasingly aware of Elara in ways that had nothing to do with responsibility or charity. He noticed the grace with which she moved through the world, economical and precise. He noticed the rare smiles that lit up her face when she was pleased or amused. He noticed the way she hummed old French songs while she worked, the melodies her father must have taught her. And he noticed the way his heart rate picked up when she was near, the way his eyes sought her out across the clearing, the way he found excuses to be close to her. One afternoon in late July, Colton was working on repairing a section of the stable roof when he heard Elara's voice raised in alarm. He dropped his tools and ran, his hand going automatically to the knife at his belt. He found her at the edge of the clearing, facing down a young black bear that had wandered too close. The bear was probably only 2 years old, still learning its boundaries, but it was big enough to be dangerous if it felt threatened. "Don't move," Colton said quietly, approaching from the side to put himself between Elara and the bear. He made himself bigger, raising his arms and speaking in a firm, loud voice. "Get on! Go on! Nothing for you here!" The bear huffed, swaying back and forth as it tried to decide what to do. Colton took a step forward, maintaining his aggressive posture, and that was enough to tip the scales. The bear turned and lumbered off into the forest, crashing through underbrush in its haste to leave. Colton waited until he was sure the animal was gone before turning to Elara. "You okay?" She nodded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the elevated breathing that came from a surge of fear. "I should have heard it sooner. I got distracted. It's gone now, no harm done." But Elara was shaking her head, frustration and anger evident in her expression. "I know better. Mama always said the wilderness punishes carelessness. I got careless." "You're human," Colton said gently. "And we all get distracted sometimes. I can't afford to. I have to be better than that." "Why?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "Why do you have to be perfect all the time?" "Because if I'm not, I'll die." The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. That's what happened to them. One mistake, one moment of not being careful enough, and they died. I can't let that happen to me." Colton closed the distance between them, putting his hands on her shoulders. She tried to pull away, but he held firm, not roughly, but with steady pressure. "Elara, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "You're alive," Colton said quietly but intensely. "You've been alive for 3 years on your own, and that's a testament to your skill and strength. But you're going to make mistakes. We all do. The trick is learning from them and not letting the fear of failure paralyze you. What if the next mistake kills me? What if it doesn't? What if you spend so much time being afraid that you forget how to live?" Tears gathered in Elara's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be anything other than afraid." "Then learn," Colton said. "You're good at learning. You learned how to survive. Now learn how to live." Something broke in Elara's expression, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Colton pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept out 3 years of grief and fear and loneliness. She clutched at his shirt, her face pressed against his chest, and he just held her, one hand stroking her hair while he murmured wordless sounds of comfort. When the storm passed, Elara pulled back slightly, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'm sorry. Don't be. You needed that. I got your shirt wet. It'll dry." Colton tipped her chin up with one finger, forcing her to look at him. "You don't have to be strong all the time, not with me. I don't know how to be anything else. I'll teach you if you want." For a long moment they stood frozen, so close Colton could count the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He saw the exact moment her expression changed, when awareness shifted into something else, something heated and uncertain and full of possibility. Colton leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she instead swayed slightly toward him, he closed the final distance and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Elara went still, and for a heartbeat, Colton thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Then her hands came up to grip his shoulders, and she was kissing him back with a fierce hunger that took his breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elara looked dazed. "I've never been kissed?" She shook her head. "Was it okay?" A slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features. "Yes? Can we do it again?" Colton laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Absolutely." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the taste of her, the feel of her body pressed against his. She was all lean muscle and sharp edges, but she fit against him perfectly, as if they'd been designed to come together this way. When they pulled apart the second time, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I probably should have asked first if this was something you wanted." "If I didn't want it, you'd know," Elara said dryly. "I'm not exactly subtle." "No, you're not," Colton smiled. "That's one of the things I like about you." "What are the other things?" "Your strength, your resilience, the way you see the world, the way you're not afraid to be yourself, even when that self is complicated." He paused. "And you're beautiful." Color flooded Elara's cheeks. "I'm covered in dirt and wearing old buckskin." "You're still beautiful." She ducked her head, clearly not knowing what to do with the compliment. Colton let her have her moment, then gently took her hand. "Come on, we should finish our work before dark." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and everything felt different. The air seemed clearer, the colors more vivid, the world somehow more alive than it had been an hour before. That night, after dinner, they sat closer together by the fire than they had before. Colton had his arm around Elara's shoulders, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. They talked about small things, the changing weather patterns, the animals they'd seen, plans for preserving food for the coming winter. "I want to stay," Elara said suddenly. "Not just for a while. For as long as you'll have me." "You're welcome here forever," Colton said without hesitation. "This is your home now if you want it to be." "What if you change your mind?" "I won't." "How do you know?" Colton shifted so he could look at her properly. "Because I've been half alive for 9 years. Going through the motions, but not really feeling anything. And then you showed up, feral and fierce and more alive than anyone I'd ever met. And something in me woke up. I don't know what this is between us or where it's going, but I know I don't want to lose it." "I'm scared," Elara whispered. "So am I. What if I'm not good at this, at being with someone? Then we'll figure it out together. I'm probably not going to be good at it either. I've been alone a long time." Elara was quiet for a moment, then said, "My parents used to say that love was a choice you made every day, that it wasn't just a feeling. It was deciding to stay, to work through the hard things, to build something together." Sounds like they were smart people. "They were." She took a deep breath. "I choose this. You. Us. Whatever we're building here." "So do I," Colton said. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth. "Every day, for as long as you'll have me." As August arrived and the mountains began their slow transformation toward autumn, Colton and Elara settled into their new reality as a couple. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, discovered what made the other laugh or think or grow quiet with emotion. Colton taught Elara to shoot his rifle properly, impressed by how quickly she picked up the skill. She'd hunted with a bow before, but had never had access to firearms. Within a week, she could hit a target at 50 yards, and Colton took her on her first deer hunt with the rifle. They stalked through the forest in the early morning, moving in the synchronized silence of people who understood each other instinctively. When they spotted a young buck, Colton gestured for Elara to take the shot. She steadied the rifle, controlled her breathing the way he'd taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean, dropping the deer instantly. Elara lowered the rifle, and Colton saw tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," Elara said. "It's just, Papa always said that taking a life, even for food, was sacred, that you had to honor the animal's sacrifice." She wiped at her eyes. "I wish he could have seen that shot. He would have been proud." Colton pulled her close. I'm sure he would have been, and I'm proud of you too. They field-dressed the deer together, with Elara demonstrating techniques her father had taught her that were new to Colton. By the time they dragged the carcass back to the cabin, it was mid-afternoon, and they spent the rest of the day processing the meat, salting some for preservation, and smoking the rest. That night, exhausted and satisfied, they lay together in Colton's bed, a transition that had happened gradually over the past weeks as Elara spent less and less time in her own room. She fit perfectly in the curve of his body, her back pressed against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Elara murmured sleepily. Colton thought about it. "Sometimes when the snow gets real deep in winter and I can't get out for days at a time, I talk to myself. Whole conversations, arguments even. I think I might have gone a little crazy over the years." He felt Elara's body shake with suppressed laughter. "That's not crazy, that's just lonely." "Maybe. What about you?" "Well, what's your secret?" "I used to pretend my family was still with me," Elara said quietly. "For the first year after they died, I'd talk to them like they were there. I'd ask Mama for advice, tell Papa about things I'd seen, tell Samuel stories at night. Eventually I stopped, but sometimes I still catch myself thinking about what they'd say about something." "I don't think that's strange. I think that's love." Elara turned in his arms so she could face him. In the moonlight streaming through the window, her eyes were very dark. "I love you," she said. "I know it's fast and maybe it's foolish, but I do. I love you, Colton Reeves." His heart seemed to stop and restart in his chest. "I love you too, Elara. God help me, I do." They made love for the first time that night, a slow and tender joining that left them both trembling. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Colton traced idle patterns on Elara's shoulder and marveled at the turn his life had taken. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said softly. "After Sarah, I thought I was done. But you came into my life like a force of nature, and suddenly everything changed." "Good change or bad change?" Elara asked, though there was teasing in her voice. "The best kind of change," Colton kissed her temple. "The kind that makes you realize you weren't really living before." September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the aspen groves. Colton and Elara spent their days preparing for winter, cutting firewood, hunting and preserving meat, gathering the last of the late-season berries and roots. One afternoon, while Colton was splitting wood and Elara was mending some clothes, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Both of them tensed, and Colton set down his axe, moving to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, Dutch Henderson and 2 of his ranch hands. Colton relaxed slightly but kept the rifle within reach. "Henderson," he said neutrally, "you're a long way from your ranch." "Looking for strays," Henderson said, his eyes moving to Elara and widening slightly at the transformation in her appearance. She was clean now, her hair neatly braided, wearing a dress Colton had bought for her on his last trip to town. She looked civilized, settled, content. "Lost some cattle in the summer storms. Thought they might have wandered up this way." "Haven't seen any cattle," Colton said. But if I do, I'll send word." Henderson nodded slowly. "That girl living with you now?" "That's none of your business." Folks in town were wondering, making comments. "Let them comment," Colton said, his voice hardening. "What we do up here is our concern, nobody else's." "I'm just saying, people talk. Might be good to make things official, if you know what I mean." Elara stood, setting aside her mending. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Henderson, but we're perfectly fine as we are." Henderson looked taken aback by her clear, confident speech, a far cry from the feral creature who'd faced down his horse 3 months earlier. "Just trying to help, miss." "We don't need help," Elara said firmly, "but we appreciate you stopping by." It was a clear dismissal, and after a moment, Henderson tipped his hat and turned his horse. Well, good luck to you both. Hope you're ready for winter. It's supposed to be a harsh one." They watched the 3 riders disappear back into the forest, and when they were gone, Colton turned to Elara. "That bothered you, what he said about making things official?" "No," Elara said, then reconsidered. "Maybe. I don't care what people in town think, but—" She trailed off, looking uncertain. "But what?" "What we have, It matters to me. And maybe making it official would matter too. Not for them, for us. Colton felt his pulse quicken. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I don't know what I'm saying, Elara admitted, frustration evident in her voice. I've never done this before. I don't know the rules. There aren't any rules, Colton said gently. He took her hands in his. But if you're asking whether I'd marry you, the answer is yes. 1,000 times yes. I'd marry you tomorrow if you wanted. Hope and fear warred in Elara's expression. Really? Really? Colton pulled her close. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I've never been more sure of anything. You're it for me, Elara. You're everything. You're everything to me too, she whispered. So yes, let's make it official. Let's get married. They married on a crisp October morning with the aspen leaves turning gold around them and the first dusting of snow on the highest peaks. The ceremony took place in Sweetwater, performed by the circuit judge who happened to be passing through. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with the town's blacksmith, a gruff man named Tom who'd always been decent to Colton. Elara wore a simple blue dress, also purchased from the general store, and Colton wore his best buckskin shirt and clean trousers. They spoke their vows in quiet, serious voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Colton kissed Elara with such tenderness that Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. They celebrated with a dinner at Mrs. Chen's restaurant, then rode back to the cabin as the sun set behind the mountains. As they crossed into the clearing, Colton reined Bear to a halt. What is it? Elara asked. Just wanted to do this properly, Colton said. He dismounted, then reached up and lifted Elara down. Before she could take a step toward the cabin, he swept her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Colton, she laughed. What are you doing? Carrying my wife across the threshold, he said, indeed grinning. It's tradition. That's a foolish tradition. Maybe so, but I'm doing it anyway. He carried her into the cabin and set her down gently beside the fire he'd banked that morning. The embers still glowed, and he quickly built it back up until warmth filled the space. So this is it, Elara said softly. We're married. We're married, Colton confirmed. He pulled her into his arms. How does it feel? Right, Elara said. It feels right. They made love with the fire crackling beside them, taking their time, learning each other's bodies all over again with the knowledge that this was forever now, that they belonged to each other in every way that mattered. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in blankets on the floor, Elara said, Thank you. For what? For seeing me that day, for not looking away. For giving me a reason to stop just surviving and start living again. Colton kissed her hair. You did the same for me. We saved each other. Winter came hard and fast that year, just as Henderson had predicted. By mid-November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight even inside. But Colton and Elara were prepared. They had plenty of firewood, ample stores of food, and most importantly, they had each other. The long, dark months became a cozy cocoon where the outside world ceased to exist, and only the two of them mattered. They spent their days in comfortable routine, tending the animals, maintaining the cabin, cooking together, reading from the small collection of books Colton had accumulated over the years. Miss Elara taught Colton songs in French and Shoshone, and he taught her to play simple melodies on the harmonica he'd bought years ago, but rarely used. At night, they made love or simply held each other, talking about everything and nothing. They made plans for the future, expanding the cabin, maybe getting some chickens in the spring, improving the stable. They talked about traveling to the Shoshone territory in the summer so Elara could reconnect with her mother's people. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, they talked about children. Do you want them? Elara asked one evening in late January as a blizzard howled outside. I do, Colton said. Never thought I would, but with you, everything's different. What about you? I'm scared, Elara admitted. My mother almost died having Samuel, and childbirth up here. He is so far from help. We could go to town when the time came, stay with Mrs. Chen or someone. Maybe. Elara was quiet for a moment. But yes, I want children. I want to build a family with you. I want to do it better than was done to you, and I want us to honor how it was done for me. We'll figure it out, Colton promised. Together. Spring arrived slowly, the snow retreating inch by inch, until finally, in early April, the clearing emerged muddy but whole. The creek swelled with snowmelt, and the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth. Elara bloomed along with the landscape, her face turning toward the sun with visible joy. She spent hours outside, reacquainting herself with the world beyond the cabin walls, and Colton often found himself simply watching her, marveling at her grace and vitality. In May, Elara missed her monthly bleeding. She didn't mention it at first, waiting to be sure, but when June arrived and she missed it again, she told Colton over breakfast one morning. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Colton's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I'm sure." A smile spread slowly across Colton's face, growing until it seemed to light him up from within. "We're going to have a baby." "We're going to have a baby," Elara echoed, and then she was smiling too, though there were tears in her eyes. Colton came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly, "and I'm going to be a mother." Elara pulled back to look at him. "Are you happy?" "I'm terrified," Colton said honestly. But yes, I'm happy. I'm so damn happy I could burst." They laughed together, and Colton placed his hand on Elara's stomach, which was still flat but wouldn't be for long. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your papa. We're going to take good care of you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Elara's appetite increased, and Colton took pride in hunting and gathering to make sure she had plenty to eat. Her body changed gradually, her belly rounding, her breasts growing fuller. In August, they felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings against Colton's palm as they lay in bed. Elara gasped, her hand covering his. "Did you feel that?" "I felt it," Colton said, awe in his voice. "That's our child." "That's our child," Elara repeated, wonder and fear mingling in her expression. As autumn approached and Elara's belly grew large, Colton made preparations. He rode to Sweetwater and arranged for Mrs. Chen to come stay with them when Elara's time drew near. Mrs. Chen had delivered babies before and knew what to do. "You're a good man, Colton Reeves," Mrs. Chen said as they discussed the arrangements. "Taking care of your wife like this." "She's my whole world," Colton said simply. "I'm not taking any chances." Mrs. Chen arrived at the cabin in late October, her saddlebags full of clean linens and herbs for pain and bleeding. She took one look at Elara and pronounced that the baby would come within the week. She was right. 3 days later, in the early morning hours, Elara woke Colton with a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The labor lasted through the day and into the night, and it was the longest stretch of hours Colton had ever endured. He held Elara's hand, wiped her brow, supported her through each contraction, while Mrs. Chen directed everything with calm efficiency. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Chen kept saying, "strong and brave, just like a mountain woman should be." As the night deepened, Elara's strength began to wane. She was exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Colton could see the fear creeping in, the memory of her mother's difficult labor coloring her experience. "I can't," she gasped between contractions. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Colton said fiercely, gripping her hand. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have killed anyone else. You can do this." "Stay with me," Elara whispered. "Psh, don't leave." "Never," Colton promised. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." With a final tremendous effort, as dawnlight began to filter through the windows, Elara pushed their child into the world. The baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and indignant, and Mrs. Chen laughed with relief. "It's a boy," she announced, quickly cleaning the infant and wrapping him in soft cloth. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Elara's arms, and Colton watched his wife's face transform as she looked down at their son. All the pain and fear melted away, replaced by fierce, overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," Elara whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The baby had a shock of dark hair and his father's pale blue eyes. His tiny fist waved in the air, and when Colton offered his finger, the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Colton said, his voice breaking. "You're perfect." Elara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. We made him. We made a person. We did. Colton kissed her forehead, then the baby's. What should we name him? Elara thought for a moment. James, she said, after your middle name, and Samuel for his middle name, after my brother. James Samuel Reeves, Colton said, testing the name. I like it a lot. Mrs. Chen stayed for a week, making sure both mother and baby were healthy and teaching Colton how to help care for the infant. When she finally prepared to leave, Colton pressed extra money into her hands. You saved them, he said, both of them. I can't ever repay that. Just love them well, Mrs. Chen said. That's payment enough. The first winter with James was exhausting and magical in equal measure. The baby woke every few hours to nurse, and both Colton and Elara stumbled through their days in a fog of sleep deprivation. But every time Colton looked at his son, every time he heard that tiny cry or felt those small fingers wrap around his own, his heart swelled with a love so profound it almost hurt. Elara was a natural mother, patient and gentle, but also practical and matter-of-fact. She sang to James in 3 languages, carried him against her chest in a sling she'd made, nursed him with an ease that suggested she'd been doing it her whole life. Colton, who'd never held a baby before James, learned as he went. He learned how to change wet cloths, how to burp the baby after feeding, how to soothe him when he cried. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges, and hung it beside their bed so they could rock James without getting up. As winter gave way to spring and James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, alert baby, life in the cabin found a new rhythm. They were no longer just 2 people surviving in the wilderness. They were a family, building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. Do you ever miss it? Elara asked one evening in April as they sat on the porch watching James play with a wooden toy Colton had carved for him. The solitude, the quiet? Not even a little bit, Colton said honestly. This is better than anything I imagined for myself. You and James, you're my whole world. Even when he cries all night? Even then, Colton smiled. Well, maybe I miss the sleep a little. But not the loneliness. Elara leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad you saw me that day. I'm glad you didn't just ride past. I'm glad you let me help. I'm glad you took a chance on a scarred mountain man with more rough edges than smooth ones. You're not that rough, Elara teased. And besides, I like your edges. They fit with mine. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son discover the world one small piece at a time. Above them, the sky turned shades of pink and orange as the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything in warm light. I want more, Elara said suddenly. More what? More of this. More children, more years, more life together. She turned to look at him. I want to grow old with you, Colton. I want to watch James grow up and have children of his own. I want to build something that lasts. So do I, Colton said. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. So do I. Over the next years, their family grew. A daughter named Sarah arrived when James was 2, and they gave her Elara's mother's name, Morning Star, as her middle name. She had her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn determination, and from the moment she could walk, she followed James everywhere. 2 years after Sarah came another son, William, who was quiet and thoughtful even as a baby. He had Elara's graceful build and Colton's pale eyes, and he seemed to see more than a child his age should. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. Colton added 2 more rooms, turning their small shelter into a proper house. He built beds and tables, chairs and benches, everything needed for a family to live comfortably. Elara planted a garden in the clearing, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the rocky soil. She taught the children to identify edible plants, to read animal tracks, to move through the forest with respect and awareness. Colton taught them to fish and hunt, to maintain equipment, to work with their hands. They were raising their children the way Elara had been raised, with love and practical knowledge, with respect for the land and an understanding of their place in it. When James was 10, Elara 15, and William 8, they made the journey to Shoshone territory that they'd been planning for years. It took 2 weeks of travel, but when they arrived at the summer camp where Elara's mother's people gathered, they were welcomed with open arms. Elara's grandmother was still alive, a woman of 70 with eyes sharp as an eagle's, and a memory that seemed to hold every story ever told. She wept when she saw Elara touching her face with gnarled hands. "I thought you were lost to us," she said in Shoshone, which Elara translated for Colton and the children. "But you survived. You're strong, like your mother." "I survived because someone helped me," Elara said, smiling at Colton, "and because I remembered what Mama taught me." They stayed with the Shoshone for a month, and the children absorbed the culture like sponges, learning songs and games and stories. Colton, who'd always felt like an outsider, was surprised to find himself accepted without reservation. He hunted with the men, learned their techniques, shared his own knowledge in return. On their last night before heading home, Elara's grandmother pulled her aside. "You've done well," she said. "You've honored your mother's memory by living fully, by choosing love over fear. She would be proud." "I hope so," Elara said, tears in her eyes. "I know so." The old woman smiled. "And that man of yours, he's good. He sees you truly, loves you completely. That's rare and precious." "I know," Elara said. "I'm lucky." "Not lucky, blessed. There's a difference." They returned to the cabin in late August, all of them changed by the journey. The children chattered excitedly about everything they'd seen and learned, already planning to return the next summer. As the years passed, the children grew into capable, confident young people. James, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, developed a gift for working with animals. He could gentle the wildest horse, may coax a frightened dog to trust, understand the needs of every creature he encountered. Sarah became a skilled healer, learning from her mother and from the books Colton bought whenever he went to town. She had a precise, scientific mind, combined with an intuitive understanding of how bodies worked. People started coming to the cabin when they were sick or injured, trusting Sarah's remedies and Elara's experience. William, quiet. William turned out to be an artist. He carved wood into intricate sculptures, drew detailed pictures of the wildlife around them, saw beauty in everything, and found ways to capture it. Colton built him a studio in a corner of the cabin where he could work undisturbed. When James turned 19, he announced that he wanted to start a horse ranch in the valley below. Colton and Elara helped him file the claim and build his first barn. Within 2 years, James had a thriving business breeding and training horses that were known throughout the territory for their quality. Sarah, at 17, met a young doctor who'd come west to practice medicine in the growing towns. His name was Michael Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, and when he and Sarah decided to marry, both families rejoiced. They settled in Sweetwater, where Sarah continued her healing work alongside her husband. William chose to stay in the mountains, building his own cabin a few miles from his parents' place. He lived simply, supporting himself by selling his art to wealthy collectors back east, who'd heard of the talented sculptor in the Wyoming wilderness. Colton and Elara, now in their 50s, found themselves alone again in the cabin where their life together had begun. But it was a different kind of alone than before, not lonely, but peaceful. They were surrounded by the echoes of their children's laughter, secure in the knowledge that the family they'd built was strong and thriving. "Can you believe it?" Elara said one evening as they sat on the porch, now enlarged and comfortable, watching the sunset. "That scared 19-year-old girl and the lonely mountain man built all of this?" "We did good," Colton agreed. His hair was more gray than black now, his face lined with years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same sharp blue. "We did real good. Do you ever think about that first day? When you saw me in the street?" "All the time." Colton took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "I think about how close I came to not stopping. I almost kept riding. I was low on supplies and didn't want to deal with town drama, but something made me look, really look. And I saw you." "I'm glad you looked," Elara said softly. "I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't. You'd have survived, you always do. Maybe, but I wouldn't have lived. Not really. You taught me the difference." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Around them, the wilderness hummed with life, birds settling for the night, the wind sighing through the pines, the distant howl of wolves calling to each other across the valleys. "You know what Henderson said?" Colton mused. "That first day in town, he said you were raised by wolves." Elara laughed. "I remember. And you corrected him." "I said you were raised by survivors. And you were, by people who knew how to live in harmony with this land, who understood that strength wasn't about dominating nature, but learning to be part of it. They would have liked you, Elara said. My parents. They would have seen what I saw, a man with a good heart who wasn't afraid of the work it takes to build a life worth living. I hope so. Colton pulled her closer, and she settled against his side with the ease of decades of practice. I hope they'd be proud of what we've built. They would be, Elara said with certainty. We took everything they taught me and everything you learned on your own, and we made something beautiful. We made a family, a legacy. What could be more important than that? As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Colton thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and loneliness of his youth, the years of isolation, the moment of choice that had changed everything. He thought about Elara's losses, her survival, her courage in choosing to trust again. I love you, he said, as he'd said thousands of times before but never stopped meaning. More than anything in this world. I love you too, Elara replied, her voice warm with contentment. Always have. Always will. They sat together on the porch until full darkness fell, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. In the valley below, smoke rose from James's ranch house. In Sweetwater, Sarah was probably putting her own children to bed. In his cabin, William was likely working by lamplight and creating beauty from wood and vision. And in the mountains, the wolves howled their ancient songs, and somewhere in that wild chorus, Colton heard echoes of the girl who'd stood in the street with bare feet and tangled hair, fierce and feral and fighting to survive. She was still there, inside the woman beside him, but tempered now by love and time and the knowledge that she was home. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of mountain life. Colton and Elara grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of hard living, but their spirits remaining strong. They became grandparents many times over, their cabin filling with the chaos and joy of visiting children whenever James, Sarah, or William came to visit with their families. On a crisp autumn morning when Colton was 65 and Elara 52, they woke to find the first heavy snow of the season blanketing the world. Colton built up the fire while Elara made coffee, and they stood together at the window watching the flakes fall in the still air. Remember our first winter together? Elara asked, leaning against his side. How could I forget? I was terrified you'd change your mind about me once you'd been snowed in with me for months. I was terrified you'd decide I was too strange, too wild. Colton laughed, the sound rich and warm. Best winter of my life, despite the fears, or maybe because of them. We learned to trust each other. We did. Elara turned to face him, reaching up to touch his bearded face. Thank you for giving me a life, Colton. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for letting me love you, Colton replied. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken man who didn't know he could be fixed. You weren't broken. You were just waiting. Maybe so. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, a gentle press that held decades of love and understanding. Want to spend the day inside by the fire? I could read to you. That sounds perfect. They settled into their chairs by the hearth, Colton with one of the books William had brought on his last visit, Elara with her mending. But within minutes, Elara set aside her work and simply listened to Colton's deep voice, reading about adventures in far-off places, content with the adventure she'd lived right here. That winter passed peacefully, and spring arrived with its usual fanfare of meltwater and new growth. In May, the whole family gathered at the cabin for a celebration, Colton and Elara's 30th wedding anniversary. James came with his wife Catherine and their 4 children, the oldest already 15 and showing signs of his grandfather's height. Sarah arrived with Michael and their 3 children, including twin girls who immediately began exploring every corner of the property. William brought his wife Anna, a Shoshone woman he'd met on one of their visits to Elara's mother's people, and their 2 sons. The cabin and surrounding clearing filled with laughter and conversation, 3 generations coming together to honor the love that had started it all. They roasted a whole deer over an open fire, and Mrs. Chen, now ancient but still sharp, had sent up a special cake with her grandson. And as evening fell and the children played games in the lengthening shadows, James stood and called for everyone's attention. I want to say something about my parents, he began, his voice carrying across the gathering. Growing up, I always knew I was lucky. I had a mother who taught me to respect the land and a father who showed me how to be strong and gentle at the same time. But it wasn't until I had my own children that I really understood what they built here. He looked at Colton and Elara, emotion clear in his expression. They could have had an easy life. They could have moved to town, lived among people, had regular jobs. But they chose this, the hard work, the isolation, the challenge of raising a family in the wilderness. And they did it with love and laughter and an unshakable commitment to each other. That's a legacy worth celebrating. Sarah stood next, adding her own tribute. Mama taught me that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about seeing people truly, understanding what they need, giving them hope. And Papa taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Together, they showed me what a real partnership looks like. William, always quieter, simply said, "You taught me to see beauty in everything and to never settle for less than authentic. You taught me that love is a choice you make every day and that the work of building something lasting is always worth it." Thank you. The grandchildren added their own chaotic tributes, shouting out things they loved about Grandma and Grandpa. Grandma makes the best venison stew. Grandpa tells the funniest stories. They always have time for us, until everyone was laughing and wiping away happy tears. When the tributes ended, Colton stood, pulling Elara up with him. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I want you all to know that everything good in my life started the day I met your mother, your grandmother. She was fierce and scared, and more alive than anyone I'd ever known. And she took a chance on me, let me love her, built this family with me. Every day for 30 years, I've been grateful for that choice, and I'll be grateful for however many more days we get." Elara wiped at her eyes, then added, "Your father saved my life. But more than that, he gave me a reason to want to live. He saw past the fear and the wildness to who I really was, and he loved that person. He made me believe I deserved happiness, deserved love, deserved a future. And then he gave me all of those things." She looked around at the assembled family. This is what love builds. Not just romance or passion, though we've had plenty of both, but a legacy. People who will carry forward what we've learned and teach it to their own children. That's everything. As the celebration continued into the night, Colton and Elara slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to the edge of the clearing where they could look out over the valley. Lights twinkled in the distance, James's ranch, other homesteads, the growing town of Sweetwater. "We changed things," Elara said softly. "When we came here, this was empty wilderness. Now there's life everywhere." "Progress," Colton said, though there was a note of melancholy in his voice. "Not sure I like it much." "Me neither, but our grandchildren will probably like it just fine. The world changes. We just have to make sure we pass on what matters, the skills to survive, the wisdom to live well, the courage to love deeply." "Think we did that?" Elara gestured back toward the cabin, where their children and grandchildren laughed and talked and celebrated. "I think we did exactly that." They stood together in the gathering darkness, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something that would last long after they were gone. Around them, the mountains stood eternal, and in the distance, a wolf howled, not with loneliness, but with the joy of being alive. "I'd do it all again," Colton said. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every fear. I'd do it all again to end up right here with you." "So would I," Elara agreed. "Every single moment." The years continued their gentle march, bringing more grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. Colton and Elara slowed down, as all people do, but they remained active and engaged with life. They still took walks in the forest, though shorter ones than before. They still sat on their porch watching sunsets, still held hands like newlyweds, still found reasons to laugh every single day. When Colton was 73, he developed a persistent cough that worried everyone. Sarah brought her husband Michael up to examine him, and the doctor's face was grave. "It's your lungs," Michael said gently. "Years of breathing cold mountain air, and probably some scarring from old infections. There's not much we can do except make you comfortable." How long? Colton asked, characteristically direct. Months, maybe a year if you're careful. I'm sorry. After Michael and Sarah left, Colton and Elara sat together on their bed, hands clasped. I'm not afraid, Colton said. I've had a good life, better than good, but I hate the thought of leaving you. Then don't think about it, Elara said firmly, though tears streamed down her face. Think about right now, this moment. We're together. That's what matters. Colton's last year was gentle, filled with visits from family and quiet days spent reminiscing. He told stories to his great-grandchildren, passed on his knowledge of the mountains to anyone who would listen, and spent as much time as possible with Elara. On a clear morning in late summer, with golden light streaming through the windows and Elara holding his hand, Colton took his last breath. His face was peaceful, and Elara knew he wasn't afraid. They buried him on the hill above the cabin, beneath a tall pine with a view of the entire valley. William carved a beautiful headstone, simple but elegant. Colton Reeves, 1846 to 1919. He saw what others missed. He loved without reservation. He lived fully. Elara stood at the grave for a long time after everyone else had gone back to the cabin. Thank you, she whispered to the man she'd loved for over 40 years. Thank you for everything. She lived for 5 more years, staying in the cabin despite her children's pleas to move closer to town. This is my home, she said firmly. This is where I lived with your father, where we built our life. I'm not leaving it. James moved his family into the cabin to care for her, and Elara spent her final years surrounded by love and laughter. She taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren everything she knew about living on the land. She told them stories of their grandfather, of their ancestors, of the Shoshone people and the French trappers, and everyone who'd contributed to their family's legacy. On a spring morning when the aspens were just beginning to bud and the first wildflowers dotted the meadows, Elara died in her sleep with a smile on her face. She was 76 years old and had lived every moment of those years fully. They buried her beside Colton under that same tall pine. William carved her headstone to match his father's. Elara Reeves, 1859 to 1935. She was raised by survivors, and she became one herself. She taught others to live. At the funeral, James stood before the gathered family, now numbering over 50 people, and said, Our parents taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice, an action, a commitment renewed every single day. They chose each other across 42 years of marriage, through every challenge and every joy. And because of that choice, all of us are here. We are their legacy, and we have a responsibility to honor it by living fully, by loving deeply, by seeing what others miss. The family maintained the cabin for generations, using it as a gathering place and a reminder of where they came from. The story of Colton and Elara became part of family lore. Told and retold to each new generation, the story of a fierce young woman who'd survived the impossible, and a lonely mountain man who'd learned to love again, and how together they'd built something that lasted forever. In Sweetwater, now a proper town with paved streets and electric lights, old-timers still told the story of the wild girl who'd faced down horses with her bare teeth, and the mountain man who'd seen past her wildness to the person underneath. The story changed over time, as stories do, but its heart remained true. 2 people who'd saved each other and in doing so had saved themselves. And in the mountains, where the cabin still stood solid and strong, visitors sometimes reported hearing laughter on the wind or catching glimpses of 2 figures walking hand in hand through the trees. Whether these were ghosts or memories, or simply the wishful thinking of people who wanted to believe in lasting love, nobody could say for certain. But every member of the Reeves family knew the truth, that love like Colton and Elara's didn't die. It transformed, becoming part of the land itself, part of the mountains and valleys and forests where they'd made their life. It lived on in their descendants, in the values they'd instilled, in the example they'd set. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blew just right, you could hear it in the howling of wolves, not a sound of loneliness or fear, but a song of survival, of strength, of love that conquered every obstacle and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of two damaged souls who'd found each other against all odds and chose every single day to keep choosing each other until the very end.